Hey. My name is Katelyn. I'm a senior at Lubbock Cooper High School. Well, yeah, I also go by K-Swiss. Whatever you want. Okay. Um, so we're just gonna start off by saying that one of my favorite places in like the entire world is the beach. It's so good and it's so calming. But it's funny because I'm terrified of the ocean. Like it scares the ever-living daylights out of me. But the same can be said for our emotions and our grief. So that's what we'll be talking about today. How God can love us even in our darkest and most sorrowful moments. So like the ocean is like our grief because it is vast and it can be beautiful, but it can also be scary to go into a place of such strong emotions and like just vastness. But one of my favorite quotes is that grief is unexpressed love that we never got to share. And I think that's what makes it so beautiful is that we have all of that love for our person that or thing or anything that we may have lost in our life that is just so deep and it makes us feel so deeply. But it can also be like a really hurtful thing, just like how the ocean like can cause such big things to happen. So like our emotions, we often talk about like the highs and lows of our emotions, like the mountains. But I like to think about my emotions as the ocean. And it can come in big waves or it can be subtle and calm. And what makes that so scary is that if you don't know how to swim in the ocean, you could drown. And if you don't know how to work through your emotions, it'll feel like you're drowning in them, which seems like really intense, but I feel like a lot of times all of us can get caught up in feeling like we're drowning in our emotions and we don't know how to deal with them. And it can sometimes feel very isolating and make us feel very alone. But another thing is obviously, if you're drowning in the ocean, you're gonna ask for a lifeguard to come help you. You're gonna be like, help, please. But in our emotions, we're gonna be like, no, I'm fine. Everything is fine. It's great. That's my favorite thing to say all the time is that it's fine. But it's not. And no one can help you if they don't know that you're drowning. So we have to surrender to that and ask for help, which is very hard to do sometimes. So our first verse we're going to be looking at is 1 Peter 5:6. If you want to get the Bible. Okay. Are we there? Okay. So 1 Peter 5:6 says, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. So if we don't humble ourselves to the Lord and be vulnerable with him and tell him that we are struggling, then we are putting on a front for the Lord, and he knows us better than we know ourselves, but sometimes we need to come to him with our big emotions and our grief and ask him to step into it with us. So one of my points is just stop trying to do it all on your own because the Lord is with you. It says, cast your anxieties on him because he cares for you. And I know a lot of times when my emotions are big, I think that I can work through it on my own, and the Lord doesn't need to see me like this because I'm happy all the time. And that's not good. Don't do that. Yeah, a lot of times we try to hide our feelings from the Lord just because it's human. It's what we all do. The Bible talks about all of the human emotions that Jesus felt while he was living on this earth. And he will come into that place with you if you just ask. So asking him is like the biggest part. Like, he loves you so much that he will walk through everything with you, and he is walking through everything with you, but if you don't invite him into that place, then you're going to be distracted from the love that he has from you because you're so focused on hiding the emotions that you have. And then Jesus got sad too. There are a lot of instances in the Bible where Jesus felt sad for his friends or for things that were happening on the earth. It made him sad, and that is one big thing that I think like gets looked over. Like, Jesus was perfect, but he was also human, and so I think that can apply a lot to our grief and our emotions. How like there is someone who loves us so much who knows exactly what we're feeling. Okay, so going back to the ocean analogy, we're going to talk about waves. So everyone always says grief comes in waves, and it does. But a lot of times the waves can be so powerful that we don't know like when they're going to hit us and when something's going to happen, and that's what makes us so scared. That's what makes me so scared of the ocean, because I have no idea what it could do. So I have a story, and it's about my mom. I asked her if I could do this. She said it was okay, so if you're listening. Okay, so we went to the beach as a family 2 years ago, and it was like really windy that day, but we live in Lubbock, Texas, right? So like beach, woo! So we got in the water, and we were, floating on the little inner tube things, and a wave pushed us to shore, and my mom got knocked off of her inner tube. And so she's like sitting in the sand, but at the shore, and the waves are coming. It's really windy, and she tries to sit up, and the waves knock her down. And that happened about 5 or 6 times. She would try to sit up, and the waves knocked her down, and she just kept getting knocked down by these waves, and because the beach is not a pool. And it wasn't until me and Parker pulled her out of the water that she stopped being just like smashed by these waves. She told me I could tell the story, so if I get in trouble later, it's not on me. But also, if we don't have anyone to help pull us out of those dark thoughts and emotions, we can start to drown in them too, and we can just get smashed by our emotions every day. And if we don't have someone to be like, hey, how are you feeling today? Let's talk through this, and let the wave actually just carry you to shore instead of getting beat up by it, it can be really damaging. And so our grief, if we view our grief as an ocean, but we don't know how to swim, and we have no one to pull us out, it can be terrifying. So we need people around us to help us stay afloat and also pull us up out of the water whenever the waves get too large. So there is a story in the Bible. His name is Lazarus. I'm sure you've heard of him. So he was one of Jesus's closest friends, and he was also the brother of Mary and Martha. And he became ill while Jesus was staying in the town that he was in. And Jesus told Mary and Martha, they were like, Jesus, what are we going to do? Like, this is not good. And Jesus was like, the Lord has a plan. And Jesus actually stayed at their house for 2 days longer than he had planned to, just to comfort their family in Lazarus' illness. And then he said, okay, I have to go. And he left the city. But a few days later, Lazarus died. And Mary and Martha were like, come on, dude, you told us that this was going to be for good, and now he's dead. How could this be good? And Jesus, he came back, and he was like, he's just sleeping. And they were like, why weren't you here? So we're going to go read a little bit about that. So that's just a little bit about Lazarus. John 11:28. Good job. Proud of you. So I'm just going to read this passage where it says Jesus weeps. I don't know if y'all has the little things, but it says, When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb and to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was, she saw him. She fell to his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved, and in the spirit greatly troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could he not, who opened the eyes of the blind man, have also kept this man from dying?" So obviously at this point in the story, the family members and friends of Lazarus are like really mad at Jesus, because they're like, "How could you just walk in here and pretend like nothing happened?" And Jesus weeps for him. Lazarus was a friend of Jesus, and that's like one of the most popular verses in the Bible is that Jesus wept, because it's the shortest verse, but I feel like it has so much power because Jesus was feeling for his friend that he had, and he knew that it was not the time and that it was not the Lord's plan, but he was upset that he couldn't heal Lazarus and that he had passed away. And so later in the story, Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, and this causes many people were around when Lazarus was risen from the dead, and God's plan is revealed that those people that saw Lazarus being raised from the dead they turned and they followed Christ that day, and it grew the kingdom of the Lord. And while in this life not many people are risen from the dead, but you can help others through. If you have been through something, you can help others through what they are feeling, no matter what it is. And even though it seems big and large and heavy, that can work in the kingdom of the Lord by showing others God's love through their pain. So, a little personal story. I just want to preface this by saying I'm not trying to get up here and tell like a sad story just to get you to, cry or something. I was telling Addison before this that I had a whole lesson planned, and the Lord was like, "No, not the time." And he told me, he said, you need to talk about your dad. And I was like, "Ooh, but I don't want to do that." And here I am. And so, yeah. I feel like grief and sadness and just like heavy emotions like that in general are not talked about a lot because they feel so daunting and scary, but the world is like plagued with it right now, and there is so much of it in this world, and I feel like we need to talk about it more. And so I hope that by sharing this story with you today, that if you've ever experienced any kind of loss, or even if you haven't, if we all get sad, it's okay to get sad, that this helps you a little bit feel a little bit less alone, and also know that like you have someone in your corner. So I don't know if you know, but my dad passed away 4 years ago in the middle of my freshman year. And so obviously that was like really hard, but then 2 months later, COVID happened and the world shut down. And so I was like really alone. And it wasn't that I didn't have people to talk to, but it was that interaction, like hugging people and just like hanging out with people, even just being like in the presence of other people that like helps you feel better. I didn't have that. And of course people were texting me, but it's different. And so I began to just like think all the time. Like my sleep schedule was horrible. I stayed up very late that night and I just like thought about everything. And that goes back to like being like drowning in your emotions. Like that was not good. And so during quarantine, I was like thinking back about like my dad and like going through this grief that I had never experienced, and it was a very unknown territory for me. And so I began to think about my dad, and he was sick for like a really, really long time, and I prayed for him to get better too many times to count. And I was sitting in my room in quarantine, like, come on, God, like, you've done this in the Bible. I've seen you've been doing this, like, even, like, just, like, healing people, like, today in, this day and age. And so I was really, really upset and mad that what I had prayed for so long didn't happen. And this is like Mary and Lazarus, like, it was, like, a very close parallel. I was like, if you had been there, if you were there, if, like, what would have happened? And I didn't realize at the time, but at camp last year, I was sitting and I was having a quiet time, and the Lord was speaking to me, and he was like, I never left you. And I was like, are you sure? And he was like, I never left. And he put that verse in my mind that Jesus wept. And I had never thought about it that way, that, like, Jesus felt what I was feeling in that moment. And I felt very comforted by the fact that Jesus, also being God, knew exactly what I was going through. It took a long time for me to, like, kind of build my relationship back up, and for me to realize that, like, it was going to be a little different than what I had before, of just, like, praying and praying and praying. And now I'm, like, building this new relationship after what had happened. And so when I was preparing this sermon, I like to journal my prayers because my thoughts are all over the place. So I have to keep myself focused by journaling. And I opened up a prayer journal I had from my freshman year during that time. And I looked at it, and before opening that prayer journal, I was like, I've grown in the past 4 years, but nothing has really, like, changed that much. But reading those prayers, I was like, wow, just kidding. I have actually changed a lot and grown a lot. And the Lord was working in small ways that I couldn't see, that were, like, big and huge. But now looking back from a different perspective, it's, like, crazy how much the Lord has, like, worked through my grief and my emotions. And I couldn't see that then, but now I'm, like, so grateful to have that, because looking back on that, it shows, like, how much I've grown, but also it shows me that, like, where I thought nothing good can come from this, I'm, like, genuinely, like, so grateful to be up here, like, telling you about this, so that you will not feel alone like I did. Not that, and I want to just point out, like, I had people talking to me. I wasn't completely alone, but it was just, like, sitting in my room at night, not ever seeing, like, anyone ever, because we couldn't go anywhere. That is what was so isolating. And also, it's not very common to, like, have that great of a loss at the age that I am. So that was a lot to work through. But now looking back, like, I have been able to help so many people, like, process through things, and, like, also just, like, lead them through a place where I have been and I'm still going through, but, like, help them through that. So, like I said, we view sadness and anger as, like, somewhat negative emotions, and especially, like, at church, like, sometimes it's kind of like, why, but you have Jesus, you should be happy. But Jesus knows how painful that was, and it is completely okay to feel sad and angry in whatever it may be, whether you've lost, like, a parent or someone you love, or maybe it's just that, like, you didn't get to do what you thought you were going to get to do, or you didn't do well on that test and you're feeling really sad about it. But God has many names. One of the names is that he is the great comforter. And I feel like this is looked over a lot because God is, like, not a tangible person, but, like, if you invite him in to where you are, he will meet you where you at. where you're at, and he will comfort you. And I feel like that needs to be said more. Just because whenever we are going through something, we're like, oh, my best friend over here, and my best friend over here, and this person. But a lot of times, sometimes all we need is, like, the Lord. In my Bible, when I was reading these verses, it says, like, in the margins, that your mourning does not indicate a lack of faith. And that's what I thought at first when I first, like, lost my dad. I was like, well, now what do I do? Because I'm, like, mad, but I'm not supposed to be mad, and I'm sad, but I'm never sad, so what does this mean? And so I just think that that was, like, really powerful, that your mourning is looked at by God by, like, a really powerful and, like, intimate thing. And going back to the 1 Peter verse about being vulnerable with the Lord, God asks us to be vulnerable with him, but a lot of times it takes, like, great bravery to be vulnerable with even the Lord. He knows you better than you know yourself, but whenever you are, like, talking with him, it's hard to be like, hey, God, like, this is not going well. I don't enjoy this. And so I wrote a quote down a really long time ago that says, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to stop being brave and start being vulnerable. So I think a lot of times what we do is we're like, I'm fine, I'm good, we're holding this together, and we, like, push our emotions down, and that's when we can start, like, drowning in them. And it's really hard to go to someone you love or to God and be like, I am struggling, especially when for so long you have put on this face that you are okay and everything is okay. So that is sometimes, like, the hardest thing to do is to admit that. And then just going back to 1 Peter. Hold on. 1 Peter 5:10. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ will himself confirm, strengthen, and establish you. So this 1 Peter is a letter by Peter, surprise, to the church. And this is sort of towards the end of the letter. And he's telling the church a bunch of different things throughout the chapter. But at the very end, he's telling them that the Lord will strengthen them through their suffering, but also they need to rely on the Lord and not their own self. So, so I know grief is, like, I don't know, like, a very hard thing to talk about and a very hard thing to go through, and especially at a young age. But I just want you to know that, like, you are not alone, and no matter how bad it seems right now, like, it is hard. It is very hard, but you will never be alone, and the Lord is always there for you, even when it doesn't feel like it. Like, I know if I were telling my freshman self this right now, she would be like, girl, no. What are you talking about? But, like, I know, looking back, that he really is there, even if it doesn't feel like it. And sometimes it does take that friend to pull you out of the deep waters and the rough surf and the waves that are just knocking you down every day, to pull you up and tell you everything is going to be okay. And even just, like, someone to lean on, someone to keep you afloat. So, it's a little early. I'm going to pray. So, dear Lord, I just pray that these kids will know your love like none other, even with all of the hard things going on in the world and all of the loss that they may be feeling, no matter how hard it feels, that you are always with them and that you have never left them, and that they are so strong and that you are walking with them through every step of the way. And I thank you for bringing all of them here today and keeping them safe, and I pray that they will hear you in the coming weeks and be comforted by you, and whenever they start to feel sad, that they will think back to you and allow you to step into their sadness or into their grief or into their emotions that they're feeling and allow you to comfort them. And I pray you keep everyone safe on the way out of here. And we love you. Amen.